Okay, so on behalf of everyone here at Merit Travel, I'd like to welcome you to today's travel talk. Joining us on the call from Merit today is Leah Miller. She's our senior regional sales rep, and also Laura Ferrugia, who you've just heard talking there. She's the senior manager of marketing. As she mentioned, she's going to be recording the session today, and during the presentation, we'll have everybody muted, and there will be time for questions and answers at the end. Okay, so just to introduce myself, my name is Audrey DeVoost. I'll have the pleasure of traveling with this group in May. This will be the 6th time that I'm traveling on one of Ted's tours. Each one of them is entirely unique, enriched by the experiences, perspectives, and the camaraderie of the remarkable travelers who come along the way. It's my very special pleasure to welcome Ted Barris and his wife Jane McCauley, who will be our hosts on this tour. We've titled the tour A Tribute to Canadian Wartime Heroes. Many of you joining us today have either traveled with Ted and Jane before, or you've had the opportunity to hear Ted speak at events and book signings across Canada. Ted is a broadcaster and best-selling author of more than 20 books, many of which I'm fortunate to have in my own personal library. Through his powerful storytelling and his dedication to sharing the lived experiences and perspectives of veterans, Ted continues to deepen our understanding of the extraordinary contributions Canadians have made during times of conflict. His commitment to preserving these stories and memories truly is second to none. Ted spent 50 years broadcasting with CBC Radio and Television, taught journalism for 18 years at Centennial College, and currently writes a weekly newspaper column and blog titled The Barris Beat. His career has earned him numerous awards and accolades, including the Queen Elizabeth II Diamond Jubilee and Platinum Jubilee medals. And most recently, and most notably, Ted was appointed a member of the Order of Canada in October of 2024 for advancing our understanding of Canadian military history as an acclaimed historical author, journalist, and broadcaster. So with that, and without any further delay, it's my great pleasure to turn the presentation over to you, Ted.
Thanks, Audrey. A pleasure, as always, to be with you and the Merit team, and to share with you some of the things we have in store for our upcoming tour. You downplay how significant your role, Audrey, is in our events, not just these, but on the road. You have all of the things that we need to make the to dot the I's, cross the T's, and make sure that everybody on the tour gets all the things we intend and more. So we appreciate your help on the road as well as today. Jane and I are going to talk a little bit about the upcoming plans for the tribute to Canadian Wartime Heroes. As I tried to suggest in the title, we are really focused on people. Yes, there will be context. Yes, there will be cemeteries and monuments and cities and places that you've heard of that we want to visit and share with you, but we want to put a face on all of this. But to start, I want to talk a little bit about how we'll get going. We're going to get together, as we often do, at one of Pearson's pre-boarding lounges. In the package that you purchase, you'll be invited into the lounge prior to our takeoff on the night of May the 1st. And the lounges are very comfortable. They're usually pretty busy, but it's great for us because we get reconnected. For those of you who've been with us before, it's a chance to catch up. And then we get introduced to new folks to join us. And then we make our way down to the gate and fly out overnight. In this case, we'll be flying across the Atlantic to Gatwick. And we haven't been to Gatwick in a while, but it's a smaller airport than Heathrow, so it might be a little less hectic than Heathrow generally is. When we arrive in London, we're going to board our coach and meet our guide. We're assisted by folks in Britain and Northwestern Europe who plan these kinds of tours called the Group. And you'll meet our guide to be with us throughout the trip. And we're going to go to Windsor Castle area, not so much to see Windsor Castle because that's a very lengthy thing, but this is a lovely spot to land. Get a little bit climatized, shake out a little bit of the cobwebs, have a lunch, and then we get going on our tour of sightseeing. And we'll head downtown And depending on the traffic, and in London, it's always a crapshoot. You just never know how bad it's going to be to get around. But we're going to try to cover some of the obvious things, get to sites in the Westminster area, but also along the Westminster Embankment. We're going to stop at this memorial. It's the Battle of Britain Memorial, because one of the very important elements of this trip will be to feature aspects of the Battle of Britain, which of course precedes D-Day and beyond. We've in our trip last September, we had a lot of fun exploring these areas, and one of our stops, very emotional, is this terrific relief of the Battle of Britain, and it names all those who participated. And then we'll go to something we planned to visit last September, but because of construction at the church, the Clement Danes RAF Church was inaccessible that day. We hope everything will be okay for this trip. And out front are two very imposing statues. The man on the left is Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding, and on the right is Air Chief Marshal Arthur Harris, the former of Fighter Command, the latter of Bomber Command. And even though they were in the same tent, they didn't always agree. And we'll show a little bit of that aspect of the Battle of Britain as we move, and we'll venture into the church for the first time because we didn't get there last time. We hope to this time. And then, as we always do on our arrival on any of our tours, the first night we sit down together and we have what's called a welcome supper. And yeah, it's a meal and it's a chance to get ourselves booked into our hotel and all of that. But this is a great time to kind of meet some of the folks that you haven't yet, and to begin to share stories. And by that I mean we are giving as much of our research and my writing and Jane's writing and interest in all of this to you. We're inviting your participation because we want to know, even before we leave, why you're going, what you want to see. Hopefully it's within the realms of our plans, but we're also hoping that maybe there are relatives in your past, a dad or a granddad or a grandmom or a relative or a friend, a neighbor whose story connects to some of the places we're going to visit. So I will approach some of you before we go and get a chance to sense what some of those stories are so that we integrate them as we move through our tour. On the first full day in London, we're going to go to one of the most important Battle of Britain sites, and that is the Hendon RAF base. This is, if not the largest, one of the largest aviation museums in Europe. And this features all of aviation history, like from the first flight through to space travel. But we're going to focus. There are 6 hangars at Hendon. It was a working Air Force base during the war. And we will show you some of the fabulous mint condition aircraft and some of the stories that are there. At the museum. We'll focus a little bit on the Battle of Britain, but you'll certainly have freedom in the time we're there to wander and discover other things. Again, our focus is people, and we'll tell you a little bit about some of the people whose stories I've found in our travels and in my research and writing. Johnny Kent, for example, who was one of the flight commanders in the famous RAF 303 All-Polish Squadron. We'll also learn a little bit about McNabb. Ernie McNabb came from Saskatchewan. He was the squadron leader for the first self-contained RCAF fighter squadron in the Battle of Britain, and some of the stories that come from him and his background in Saskatchewan are unique. And we'll also tell you a little bit about how women played a key role in the Battle of Britain. Some of you may be familiar with the name Elsie McGill. This is she, and she plays a role with another Canadian, Lord Beaverbrook, who became Churchill's Minister of Aircraft Production. And Elsie's involvement was in that one of the things that Beaverbrook felt was necessary was to hide some of the construction of Spitfires and Hurricanes aircraft required for the Battle of Britain. And he created what were known as shadow factories. One of them involved Elsie McGill, and we'll tell you her story as we go along because she was key in delivering Hurricanes to the Battle of Britain. Now, also part of this important sort of delving into the fighter command component of the Battle of Britain is our trip to this place, which we discovered for the first time on our trip in September. This is the bunker beneath a museum in a little place called Uxbridge. We live in Uxbridge, Ontario, Jane and I. But Uxbridge in England is on the outskirts of London, and we'll go down into the underground bunker, down 76 steps, into the deployment room, which is down about 3 stories. This is preserved exactly as it was in 1940, where the RAF Fighter Command and that man I mentioned earlier, Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding, and his fellow officers essentially scrambled aircraft to meet the inbound bombers of the Germans, the Luftwaffe, bombing targets in Britain. And it was in this room, as you see it here in this photograph. And I'm going to roll a little bit of video, which I took when we visited. One of our guests or guest lecturers when we were there was the man who's leading this discussion here. I'll be quiet so you can hear a little of this.
So here we have the southeast of England and London and the southeast, controlled by 11 Group under the command of Air Vice Marshal Keith Park, the guy in the statue that we mentioned upstairs. But I don't think I mentioned that White House over there, Ilion House, was his headquarters during the Battle of Britain. The southwest of England and South Wales down here, controlled by 10 Group from RAF Box in Wiltshire, under the command of Air Vice Marshal Sir Christopher Quinton Brand, who was a South African. The Midlands and North Wales was controlled by 12 Group from RAF Watnall in Nottinghamshire, under the command of Air Vice Marshal Trafford Lee Mallory, most famous for the fact that he and his number 2 Douglas Bader did not get on with the tactics being used by Dowding and Park. And in fact, very famously, after the Battle of Britain, the two men who saved this country from invasion were both elbowed aside in political infighting, led by, or at least encouraged by, Bader and Trafford Lee Mallory and Bader.
Now, you see on the wall behind him, by the way, that map is exactly as it was in 1940. On the wall behind are panels, each one allocated to the squadron being deployed, scrambled to meet the bombers. He'll show us how it all worked. Literally, it's exactly as it was 85 years ago. So we'll explore that as we visit this location. Then we're going to take a trip to another aspect of the Battle of Britain and beyond. We'll take you back downtown on our next day. This is May the 4th. This is Trafalgar Square, of course, with in the distance across from the Nelson statue is the British Museum, and off behind Trafalgar, the monument to Nelson is St. Martin's of the Fields. And then Canada House, which is off to the left and on the right-hand side in the picture, is literally in that same square. We'll get a chance to poke around some of this area. We'll have some lunch, and then we're going to move on to a really important stop that we'll walk. And we'll walk past 10 Downing Street and past the guards facility where the horse guards are housed. We'll pass the Ministry of War, and we'll go to the Cabinet War Rooms, which are, this is obviously a newer entranceway, but we'll go inside. We had a failed attempt back in September with our Battle of Britain tour. We got everybody inside. We were about 5 minutes in, and they had a fire alarm, some sort of a scare, and we had to be evacuated, and we were unfortunately unable to complete that part of our tour. Hopefully it'll all go smoothly this time. And as we go down into the war rooms, you will see where Churchill spent the majority of the war in terms of his strategizing and dealing with the tactics with his inner circle of cabinet ministers and commanders. And from here, Churchill, underground in London, right beneath the War Ministry, directed Britain's response to the invasions of northwestern Europe and the Japanese invasions of the Pacific and all the islands and Southeast Asia and so on. All from here. And it's literally, these are mannequins, but they are literally showing us how it all was, and you'll get a sense of how the operation moved. In addition to that, underground in this war room area is the Churchill Museum. In other words, not just memorial to the men and women who participated in the direction of the war from the British side, but also a museum in honor of Churchill. I hadn't even seen or heard of this photograph before. It shows Churchill in Alberta in 1929 on a speaking tour, and he was there with his son and his nephew and his brother. And I had never seen that shot. But also there will be artifacts that were Churchill's, this stopwatch, and many, many other things. So we'll take the time to allow you to catch up with any of the Churchillian background and data that you've never seen before. It'll all be here. Then we move on to Portsmouth on the 5th. And this is a really fascinating stop because it's one of our favorites. And this rather interesting looking building is a manor house, an estate home in a little place called Southwark, which is a suburb of Portsmouth. And in this place, in 1944, the members of the Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, Eisenhower and Company, Montgomery, Bradley, RAF, and American military personnel planned the D-Day invasion. In fact, we will visit the room where the map, as you can see here, just being adjusted and kept preserved by this woman on the ladder, is exactly as it was on June the 6th, 1944. Now, this facility is not accessible to everybody. It's actually on Navy turf. And so we have to get special permission, which we have, to go into this facility and see this map and soak up the atmosphere of June the 6th, 1944. Then later that evening, we will get into our hotel. We will, I guess, of the previous day. But we're going to explore on the 5th also this great museum in Portsmouth. It's probably the only museum dedicated to D-Day in the UK. And it has items such as this. Look at the size of that landing craft. It's an American landing craft. It was used on D-Day and preserved in the museum. Inside the museum, fabulous artifacts. And one of the most incredible sights is this tapestry stitched together over years of the D-Day invasion. And it's remarkably preserved, just like the Bayeux tapestry commemorates the Norman invasion of Britain. This is the tapestry depicting the Allied invasion of Normandy in 1944.
It's actually an embroidery.
It's a beautiful embroidery, and it has the whole story for us, laid out the same way the Bayeux tapestry is. Now, we're going to move finally that day to the Golden Lion pub. And why this? Well, we have visited here before, and we met in the pub Greg Clark, who's the wonderful owner-operator of the pub. And he regaled us the first time we were there. We just went in for a beer with our group, and we decided on the following trip to spend an evening, and it was glorious because Clark just is a great raconteur and told us all the great stories associated with Southwark House and Southwark and all of the background to the D-Day preparations, including just beyond the wall he's standing in front of at the bar is a little snug. And in that snug, during the preparation for the D-Day landings, sat none other than Dwight Eisenhower and Bernard Montgomery, planning after hours over a tot or two the final days and moments leading up to D-Day and the invasion. So not only will we have a nice meal here that night, but we'll also get a sense of the history of the place too, thanks to Greg.
That's a great beer.
It's yeah, you can see by the tapestry of beer in front of us what we were exposed to and enjoyed. Okay, next day, travel day. We will be crossing from Portsmouth across the English Channel to Le Havre. Now, why have we chosen this particular path? Because if you'll remember the map I just showed you, that's the same route that the Allies took on the morning of June the 6th, 1944, in 10 channels, crossing the English Channel from Portsmouth and other locations on South England, all into the Bay of the Seine to begin the D-Day landings. So first of all, we'll go to this wonderful terminal at Portsmouth, and we will board our ferry. And it takes about, 7-8 hours to get from
6.5,
from Portsmouth to Le Havre, and we'll be aboard the ferry, and they'll have services there. We'll take our luggage on board. We leave the one coach behind us in Portsmouth, and the one that meets us in Le Havre will be sitting waiting for us when we get there. In the meantime, we'll be aboard this ferry and crossing the channel, and we'll find a little corner to sit down, and I'll tell you some of the stories again, particularly as we travel the waters between England and France, about some of the preparations that led to this moment, the D-Day crossings, with something like 200,000 men, 7,000 ships, and a whole lot of worry and fear that this might go wrong because the weather had been so horrible leading up to this day, and suddenly the 6th it cleared, and we went for broke, and it paid off. We will land, and we will move to our lodgings in Bayeux, and then on Thursday morning, the following morning, we will begin our search of the D-Day story across the beaches, beginning in the easternmost beach, Sword, the British sector, and we'll stop first at the Pegasus Museum. And in it, we will see moments such as this, captured on the 6th of June. This is the capture of the Caen Canal Bridge just on the edge of the city of Caen by British commandos just after midnight on the morning of June the 6th. This is a photograph of just later that day. And the bridge itself, because it is, over 80 years old, was preserved and moved to the museum. So the bridge that's actually crossing the canal today is a brand new one. This is the original bridge that was captured on that morning, and we'll take you onto the bridge, and our guides there will show us around what happened in that paratroop and commando landing. And you can see, when we get on the bridge, you can see evidence of the fire under which this bridge was taken from the Germans in a matter of minutes by the British commandos. Also, there will be these massive Horsa gliders. This is a replica. And one of the ways that the commandos landed on D-Day in this area so quietly, so efficiently, so close to the bridge was courtesy of the pilots who flew these and with what were called controlled crash landings, brought these magnificent wooden gliders down with all their equipment in it, and then allowed them to get out and do the job of commencing the invasion. We will then move from east to west to the Juno sector. This is a famous portion of the Juno Beach, the Canadian sector, depicting what's now known as Queen's Own Rifles of Canada, Canada House. This building remains today. You can see it in this photograph, and ceremonies happen there all the time. Not when we'll be there, because we'll be passing through and it'll be May, but you'll still be able to see Canada House, and Jane and I will share some stories of some of the people associated with this particular landing sector of Juno Beach landings. We will also make a brief stop to revisit a piece of discovery that came our way as recently as a year ago. This is a frame of motion picture film, 35 millimeter film. You've probably seen the whole film before. The clarity is amazing, and it shows Canadian troops landing on Juno Beach. Up until a few years ago, it was thought that this photograph, or this film, was shot in front of the building you're seeing on the left, the Queen's Own House. In fact, it was not. And revelations, that's a beauty of history, is that we keep discovering new things. We found out that the actual landing area was about 2,000 meters to the east of this building on the left. And that building you see in the film, we will take you to that spot and see the cairn marking the true landing, the true image of what the soldiers, the Canadians, saw when they landed on this particular sector of Juno Beach on the morning of June the 6th. We will then move on to the Juno Beach Center area at Courseulles, and we will visit the now famous Juno Beach Center. This is the museum that was built largely by veterans' money. They invested millions of dollars and sought out more from governments and for private corporations. You may remember that Walmart donated millions in the refurbishing of, or the building of this museum. And of course, it commemorates all of those who served in the liberation of Europe, not just D-Day, but beyond. And you'll get a chance to go into the museum and have a look around. This is the famous sculpture out in front, in this particular moment being used as a commemoration on November the 11th or June the 6th, one or the other. And you'll get a sense inside the museum. The museum contents, the exhibitions, change fairly regularly. So we're going to see brand new material arriving in the museum this year. And then one of the most moving stops of that particular day and of our entire trip is to go to the war cemetery just up from Juno Beach at Benny-sur-Mer. This is the Benny-sur-Mer Canadian War Cemetery. And over the years, Jane and I and all our tours have taken our travelers to various grave sites, not just to pay homage to the volume, the 2,048 people buried there, but also some of the individual Canadian stories that have emerged in our research and the research offered by our travelers. This is where I come back to the point of hoping that you will share with us some of the stories. Jane is particularly enamored by the man on the right-hand side of the screen. Did you want to say something about
No, I'm going to tell them there.
Okay.
There.
His name is Rosaire Gagnon.
From the Chaudière.
The Chaudière, the Régiment de la Chaudière. His story, like the man on the left, Don Bernard, he of the Queen's Own Rifles, are unique. They're in my book, Juno, but what's so moving is to take you there, and like the three brothers, the Westlake brothers story, all lost within days of each other around June 6th and the landing are so moving, not just because those stones have been beautifully kept and the grounds around them immaculate, but because the memories of who they were, what they did, how they served, and how they were lost come back to us through the stories that we'll share with you. We then, on the next day, on the 8th, moved to the American sector. This is the famous Omaha Beach sector. Now, this is an aerial shot of the memorial, the far end at the top of the screen. That's the actual memorial. And look at the grave sites of the 9,389 American war dead in this cemetery. Off to the left, you can see the shoreline. It looks very unassuming, very innocuous, but in fact, the level of the water and the level of the top of this ridge is so dramatic at Omaha. It was what was probably the most difficult landing of all 5 beaches. The climb through that lower area on the beach up to these heights by the Americans on June the 6th. We'll take you into the cemetery, and John Bertram, who's with us today, had a special thing happen when we were there the last time, a couple of years ago. John was able to, by special appointment, go into the cemetery and find the grave of a cousin. And it was very moving for him and for us because he shared with us after his trip into the location of the grave what had happened. Among the places I hope we'll get to, and it really depends on how finicky the Americans are about letting us into these cemeteries at this particular point. I'm hoping we'll be able to take to the graves of these 2 men. You won't know them by their faces, but you might recognize them by their names. On the left is Robert, and on the right is Preston Nyland. And it was because of the deaths of those 2 men and the probable loss, they thought, of their brother Edward, that their 4th brother, all of whom had enlisted, was prevented from any harm beyond his already commitment in the Normandy landings from being lost. This was the story on which the Saving Private Ryan movie is based. And we'll take you to those 2 graves, tell you a little bit more about the story. But there are other remarkable people buried there too. There are presidents' sons and other remarkable people. We'll take you to a few of those graves, again, depending on how accessible they are, but our being there in May shouldn't be a problem. Then we were going to move on to another sector, the gold sector, again, a British sector, and this is the town of Arromanches. And it's unique because it has the refurbished D-Day Museum, which you can see here on the left of that shot behind all the flags. This particular museum is quite massive, but it tells a unique story. This is the story of the artificial Mulberry Harbor, which I'm going to show you in a black and white photograph there. In order for the landings on D-Day to succeed and for the Allies to proceed inland, of course, you know they have to be resupplied. And the difficulty of landing in Normandy was that there were very few seaports, so an artificial one had to be built. And in a matter of days, this artificial port called a Mulberry Harbor was built. And what's remarkable is 80 years later, there's still evidence of those caissons that were sunk and on which the platforms for the Mulberry Harbor were built. You can see this person walking on the beach. The tide is way out. Those structures out in the distance are the caissons on which the Mulberry Harbor was built. There are 17 of them, I think, still visible. And depending on the tide, you'll be able to walk up to some of them and touch their massive concrete and get a sense of the magnitude of this incredible story. That's at Arromanches. Then we move on to one of the most extraordinary parts of our trip, and that is to catch up with a group called the D-Day Academy. They are under the guidance and leadership of this man. He's a former dentist. His name is Jean-Pierre Benamou, and he and his friends at the Academy, all volunteers from the Normandy area, have managed to salvage, preserve, and maintain vintage vehicles from the D-Day 1944 period. And we will board them with his leadership and take you to places most people don't see. Among the places, among the stops, will be this particular Air Force base. When the Allies landed in Normandy, they had to then build airfields so that the aircraft which were helping the infantry to penetrate, and the tanks and the artillery and so on to penetrate deeper inland, they had to have Air Force fields in France. This is one of them. And it was built, this particular airfield was actually laid out and built by Royal Canadian Air Force ground crew, one of whom was our neighbor here in Uxbridge. We'll tell you that story when we get there. We'll also go to Abbey Dardin, which is a gorgeous old cathedral, but has a very sad story attached to it. And that is that this was the vantage point. The elevation of this photograph is interesting because this was the view that Kurt Meyer, who was head of the Hitler Youth, the commander of the Panzer Division in this area, attempting to push the Allied invasion back into the sea. And it's on June the 7th, the day after D-Day, that he spots a line of Canadian tanks and infantry moving inland, and he zooms in with his forces, captures them, and because the young men who are in his command are so rabid with their Nazi philosophy, an execution occurs here of 20 or more of the Canadians. They were later caught and prosecuted, but we'll take you to a commemorative which is there in that churchyard. We'll also go to this incredible site, a location known as Longues-sur-Mer. These are the guns that the German, gun positions that the Germans built to defend Fortress Europe. And they're all along the coast, and these are preserved pretty much as they were, and you'll be able to walk among those gun emplacements. It was also at this location where scenes from The Longest Day were shot, and we'll take you to those locations too. And then we'll take you to, finally that day, to the D-Day Academy Museum, which is an incredible museum. All of these artifacts gathered and preserved and shared with the visitors. It's not like other museums where it's all encased in glass and you know, you're not allowed to touch. You're allowed to get your hands on just about everything. And right in the middle of that photograph again is Jean-Pierre. And in this particular moment a few years ago, one of our travelers had preserved a map that his dad had saved from the war, and Don, the man in the blue jacket, was presenting to Jean-Pierre so that it could be contributed to the museum's archive that day and beyond. And then to finish that day, we're going to go to a restaurant that Jane and I love. And Audrey, I think we made a big fan of you on this one too, called La Ferme de Billy. It's a terrific restaurant, had extraordinary foods, all of course locally based, and in a kind of a buffet fashion. And together that with the wine and beer was a perfect ending to a perfect day. We then move inland to an area known as Falaise. This is where, among other places, this is a road leading into Falaise. This is the location of the famous Falaise Gap battle. You can see from that map, that dotted line is the front lines of the Allies as they began to close around the Germans, who suddenly realize that they are threatened and they begin to retreat. One of the men who helped stop that retreat is third from the left in this photograph with a pistol in his hand. His name is David Curry, and for his action in August of 1944, he received the Victoria Cross. We will go to that location, and then we will go to the museum which depicts all of the action of the Falaise Gap. This is, and you can see by the valley beyond the museum how deadly the perspective was of the Allies around this valley of death for the Germans. As they attempted to retreat, the Allies attempt to prevent it, and Eisenhower referred to this area as the perfect killing field. 60,000 German casualties. We'll go to the museum and you'll get a sense of the perspective and of the incredible loss, and to a certain extent, the importance of it pivotally in the Battle of Normandy. Again, a photograph of German prisoners of this operation. We then move on to Dieppe on Saturday, or at least at the end of that day, we will move on to Dieppe. This is a high point looking from west to east across the north coast of France and across this very important Canadian location. If we can, and we often try to do this, we take the group to this high point so you get a real sense of the panorama view, not only that we have as tourists, but that the Germans had of the landing on the 19th of August, 1942, of 6,000 troops attempting to move onto that beach and up into the town of Dieppe for purposes which we will describe when we get there. One of our stops on our first day there, the arrival on Saturday evening, will be go to the actual Dieppe Museum in this old theater. This is what it looks like inside. It's just fabulous. And they have docents who tell us the stories, cases full of artifacts and photographs and stories of the Canadians who served there. This was principally a Canadian operation, and it involved 6,000 troops, 5,000 of whom were Canadians. On the next day, we will take you to the beach. And I'm going to be quiet here as I show you a little bit of this video, a panoramic shot from the low level as I was sort of kneeling on the beach looking to sea. And then I do a panorama left to right shot of the beach behind us, so you get a sense of what the Canadian perspective was as they landed. One of the most extraordinary stories is sitting in front of you. The stones on that beach, completely missed by Allied intelligence as a barrier to the invasion, to the seaport raid. This chert rock turned out to be one of the most devastating opponents, even as devastating perhaps as the Germans who were deeply embedded in that area, the cliffs around Dieppe. We'll take you to the beach. You'll have difficulty walking on it, and that's a signal of why it was so deadly and what the problem was. We'll also tell you about some of the Canadians who served there. This tanker, Stephen Bell, this medic, Alexander, excuse me, might just slip my memory. It'll come, Alexander Lawrence, and the famous John Foote, the Padre, who was with the troops and decided to stay. Their stories,
VC, right?
and got the VC, yeah. We'll tell you these stories and take you to the locations around there. A few monuments. Our hotel is right on the beach. We will be able to share with you these locations and the stories associated. Then later that day, same day, once we finish in Dieppe, we're going to go up towards the Pas de Calais. This is a museum that Jane and I have not visited yet, but we thought we would add it because it is unique. It is from this location. This dome looks pretty much like a chunk of concrete. It's many, many feet thick, and it housed the V-2 rockets that the Germans were readying for launching against England. These remarkable tunnels housed the rockets you see here. And these were the ones that were launched at Britain beginning in 1944 and across occupied Europe, because once the Allies had a toehold, one of these fell on a theater in, what was this city in Belgium? Not Brussels. It'll come to me. But these were the targets that the Germans chose, and the rockets were fueled sufficient to go over the targets, run out of fuel, and fall and explode, killing hundreds, if not thousands. Then we're going to move on to Belgium. We go to the city of Ypres, which the Belgians refer to as Ypres, and the British refer to as Wipers. And this is the extraordinary square where we will be visiting a number of times during our stay there. It's unique. It has everything you'd ever want. Not just the cloth hall you see in the middle of the screen and the cathedral beyond. It has boutiques and chocolate shops and bars and cafes, all of them not pricey but manageable. And now imagine this particular location, as you can see it, being centuries old. Originally it was, but it was also destroyed during the war by German artillery, which we'll get to in a moment. One of the things we're going to do on the first night, however, is to take you to the east end of this square, to the Menin Gate. This gate was built in the 1920s to commemorate the Allies who had, throughout the First War, from 1914 to 1918, had kept the Germans from invading Ypres. And every night at 8 o'clock since 1928, buglers from the local fire brigades come out and do the last post and reveille. And as you can see, hundreds gather every night of the year rain or shine, they're there, both the buglers and the onlookers, to witness this tribute to the Allies who preserved Ypres throughout the Great War, preventing the Germans from ever entering it. To go back to that shot of Ypres and what it was like in 1915, that was the wreckage that the Germans inflicted on the city of Ypres, but they never took it because the Canadians and other Allied troops, Commonwealth troops mostly, prevented their entry. And so we will spend some time going to locations that are key. This is going, of course, back to the Great War. Positions that were key in the Great War. You see this bulge, this line on the right-hand side. It was known as the Ypres salient. The Western Front extended, this is the Germans on the north side and the Allies on the south side, extended from the North Sea all the way to the Alps, 500 miles. It was pretty much an even single straight line all the way through northwestern Europe, except for this bulge around Ypres, where the Allies prevented the Germans' entry. So we'll go to locations that are key to that story of the Allied protection of that beach, salient. One of the stops will be Essex Farm. This is famous not just for its cemetery and some of the people buried in it, but also for the location of this particular bunker and this man on the left, whose face you probably recognize is John McCrae. And it was in these bunkers that he attended the wounded during the Great War along that salient. And then, of course, it was during this time that he also composed the famous poem for which he's remembered forever, In Flanders Fields. And it was, we understand, precipitated by the loss of a dear friend, Lieutenant Alexis Helmer. We'll go to this spot. We'll remember the poem. We'll go to the site, into the bunker, and into the cemetery as one of our stops on the salient. We'll also go to this very famous sculpture. It's known as the Brooding Soldier. It's at St. Julien, or also known as Vancouver Corners. And it was at this location that the Canadians encountered, as well as other Allied troops, one of the most extraordinary, horrific weapons of the Great War, the gas attack. The Germans launched chlorine gas when the wind was in the direction taking the gas into the Allied faces, and the Canadians faced this barrage and this gas attack. This painting, a Canadian painting by Richard Jack, was commissioned by Lord Beaverbrook, because he was not only the man in charge of aircraft production in the Second World War. In the First World War, he made sure that Canadians' participation in the Great War was captured in film, still photographs, and paintings. So war artists and photographers made sure that the Canadian participation in the war was captured. And this is a depiction of that gas attack. The gas attack caused incredible casualties, thousands killed or losing their sight, or drowning in the wounds to their lungs. And it fell to this man, a Newfoundlander with the Royal Newfoundland Regiment, a medical officer in civilian life, a doctor in civilian life, a medical officer. He was charged with the job of coming up with a defensive weapon against the gas weapon. And it was he, Clooney McPherson, who came up with the first successful gas mask. And he literally created it, tested it, and mass-produced it in a matter of weeks after the gas attack in April of 1915. By the end of the war, millions of these things had manufactured and saved millions of Allied troops' lives in the face of the gas. Clooney McPherson. We'll tell you more about his story when we get there. We then move on to also in Belgium, and there you can still see the salient with the arrows. And then beyond that was a famous battle, another Vimy battle, at Passchendaele. This is a photograph of Canadian stretcher bearers in Passchendaele. And the man who was key at this moment was the Canadian general, Arthur Currie, who actually commanded the forces at Vimy. But when he gets to Hill 70, which is the lead up to the Passchendaele battle, uses many of the same tactics that he and the Canadians had used at Vimy, and he chooses the targets at Hill 70 and leads that attack. First time a Canadian was commanding Canadian troops in the Great War. That's Currie in the middle. And this is the Canadians at the top of Hill 70 in the fall of 1917. We'll go to the museum and learn about men such as Samuel Sharp, who came from the town where Jane and I lived. Sam Sharp was a colonel with the 116th Battalion, and he led his forces all the way from the Somme to Passchendaele. And the cost was dear, not only in lives of the members of his 116th Battalion, but to him as well. we'll go to, this is a photograph of the men that he recruited in our community here in Uxbridge, Ontario. That photograph in 1916 is about 3 minutes from where Jane and I are sitting in a little place called Elgin Park. These were the young men that he recruited to serve, and they served with him from the Somme all the way to Passchendaele. There's the Passchendaele Museum. We'll go in there and explore that. And then on the next day, we will venture back into France and explore also Great War locations, Beaumont-Hamel, the location of the famous Newfoundland Regiment battle, and their mascot, the caribou, and also go to Vimy Ridge and the famous monument. And we will be able to take you through with the guides. The guides are actually Canadian students who are brought on because of their knowledge of the battles and these locations. The students are members of Parks Canada staff, and they will take us through the Beaumont-Hamel location and around Vimy, and you'll get a chance to see the trenches, and in the case of Vimy, the tunnels, and get a chance to go to the monument. We'll spend some time where the 18,000 plus names of Canadians for whom there are no known graves are inscribed on the monument. And we'll learn about people such as Hubbard Fisher, who is one of the few survivors of the Beaumont-Hamel attack on the 1st of July 1916 at Beaumont-Hamel. And you'll learn about Ellis Sifton, who came from southwestern Ontario and won the VC at Vimy. And you'll learn about this lady, Grace McPherson, who came from Vancouver and fought her way, figuratively, for a chance to become an ambulance driver, and her first day of action was behind the lines at Vimy on the 9th of April 1917. Then we get back to Paris for a little bit of R&R and catch up and relaxation. And this last day of our tour will allow us to get around Paris to sites you want to see. Audrey, maybe you want to chime in as I click through a couple of these images that will be very familiar for everybody.
Sure. So the very last day, we decided that everybody has a lot of different ideas about what they want to accomplish and what they want to see in Paris. So that day is completely on your own. It's at leisure. You can pick and choose what you'd like to do. And we're happy to help you with any of those arrangements. For instance, if you want to get into a certain museum and you need to buy those tickets in advance, we'll help you with those kinds of things. Also, the day of, if you just need help, how do I get from here to there? Our hotel that we've chosen, we were at a hotel that was a little bit out of town, but we've asked them to move it to one that's very close to the Eiffel Tower and very accessible to a lot of the major sites there. So there's lots of choices of things to do there. And then after the day is done, we'll all gather back to one central location, probably at the hotel or very close to the hotel, for our traditional farewell supper. The welcome dinner at the beginning and the farewell dinner at the end. These are two signature trademarks of Ted and Jane's trips. They're very important part of it. At the beginning, we're learning who everybody is, and at the end, it's a very I would say emotional time of everybody just reflecting on what we did the entire time. This is actually the one that this is from Amsterdam, I think, this particular trip.
It is.
I recognize lots of people in that picture. So.
And the lady on the right is
yeah,
actually, she's reading
a
poem that she'd composed about the trip. The wonderful thing about that Audrey is expressing here is that we share so many stories. You bring as many stories to the picnic as we bring to you. And what happens is that wonderful melange, that potpourri of all these stories coming together, and we become a family in search of and arrival at stories that we've chosen and that you in a way choose by joining us and bringing stories of uncles and aunts and grandfathers and grandmothers and stories that are important to you and you share with us. People bring flight logs and diaries on the trip, or copies of them, photographs. We encourage you to do that so that you can tell us a little bit about why you're connected to this trip and how it means a great deal to you. And in this case, I can't remember her name. She's an Order of Canada recipient,
Yes.
and she's reading from a poem she composed about the trip. So we can go, I guess, now, Audrey, to a couple of the housekeeping aspects of the trip. The things that are included.
Ted, I was just going to ask you, was it Antwerp was the name of the city that you were trying to think of?
Thank you.
Antwerp
You're right.
was where there was a V2 bombing there, and it was a boys' orphanage, I think, was one of the key places that was hit.
Thank you.
So
You'll be doing your homework.
I've learned from the best. So this screen just talks a little bit about what's all included. It's also, this information is also on the flat sheet that we've provided through one of the invitations that we sent out. If you don't have it, obviously we would send that to you. But so what's included in the trip is the host, Ted and Jane. We have the Plaza Premium Lounge, the airfare with Air Transat, the 12 nights in hotels, and all of our hotels are at least 4 stars. Breakfast every day. There's 2 suppers that are that were together, but then on top of the 2 is also the welcome and the farewell. So that's 4 of them in total. We have a coach that will be with us for the entire trip. The ferry from Portsmouth to Le Havre is included in that, and I'll be traveling with the group, so you'll have a merit representative and then Ted and Jane. Obviously, we have a local guide that or tour manager that will be with us there in destination, also with us the entire time. Then the gratuities and all the taxes, that's included. If you want to flip to the next, yeah. So this is the price. So we're leaving on the 1st of May, coming back on the 14th of May into London Gatwick and flying home from Paris. The price per person based on double is $72.99. If you are wanting to go by yourself, then there's a single supplement that is paid. Occasionally we'll have somebody that wants to do just the land only. You can do that. It's the price is there at $66.99. If you're a single and you're wanting to go, but you would like to try and avoid the single supplement, sometimes we are able to match people up and get somebody, sharing a room with you. That has happened. We would have to sort of look at that on a one-off, depending on if there's somebody else that wants to do the same. Okay, Ted, if you switch to the next one. The information required to book, it's pretty standard, your name as it appears in your passport, date of birth, that sort of thing. We actually have a link that we would send you. You just fill it in and it automatically comes back to us, and it has this information. So your date of birth, and it's just really standard address, that kind of thing. One thing I will mention is that at the moment there is a visa required for the UK, and we had to get this last year when we went on the Battle of Britain. It's very easy to get, and I think it was about $16 US, I think, at the time, and it's online. So you go online, you put in your information, and I think in 30 minutes I got an email confirmation back that with a QR code, and that was all that was required. I had a copy of it in my email. I had printed a copy of it, expecting to give it at Heathrow when we arrived. Nowhere along the way did anybody ever ask me for it, because it's linked to your passport. So when you go through customs, they already know that you've applied for it, and it was very simple. A lot of people have been asking me through my correspondence with, just a few weeks ago about this trip, whether that's required for anywhere else other than the UK. You've heard it on the news, probably, there is something similar coming up for the greater Europe that's coming up, but it is not in place yet. They had a target date of 2026 for it to start. I think in 2025 already, was delayed. Now they're talking 2026. It is out there, but it's not in play yet, so we don't have to worry about that at this moment. What was the next slide, Ted?
Next slide.
Okay, so that's just our website and the telephone number. So I think at this point, Laura, were there any questions in the chat that you noticed?
Let me have a look.
Let me just look.
No, there's no questions yet.
Okay, so if you have a question that you want to ask, now would be a good time. You just need to unmute yourself, and you can do that at the top of your screen there. Just click on your microphone and unmute yourself.
I'm just going to also stop the recording.
Right.
Okay, my question is, how many people do you have in your group? What's the